right. We're now recording. All right, so it's now 12 o'clock. I think we can begin to get started. I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to come to the Queens Historical Society's digital version of our Sacred Sites Tour. This is in partnership with the Landmarks Conservancy. And what we'll be doing is, because this is through Zoom, all of this is going to be virtual. So instead of being able to raise your hand and ask questions, what we'd encourage you guys to do is to put any questions you might have into the chat function instead. So that way we can answer them when we get a chance to. But we encourage you guys to try and participate as we walk around downtown and around Flushing, visiting the various different sacred sites. This is going to be recorded, and we might post this at a future date. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our tour guide, Jason Antos. He is the Queens Historical Society president and also an authored historian of Queens. And so take it away, Jason.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this really, hopefully what will be a very fascinating tour of the sacred sites of Flushing, Queens. And we're going to explore all of the, most of the cultural locations, as many as we can possibly get to, and learn about Flushing's diverse history in terms of religion and cultures. As we all know, Queens County has probably the most diverse population than any other county in the United States. And we have Flushing to thank for that. Flushing has really been diverse from its very origins. Actually, we start with Native Americans, and as we go into the early colonial period, which is the 1600s, we have the arrival of the Dutch, we have the arrival of the British, all bringing with them their own unique backgrounds and cultural traditions. So the Flushing, the religious history of Flushing really begins with John Bowne, okay? So John Bowne, who had come from into the New World and was practicing Quakerism, was practicing it illegally. At the time, the Director General of the colony of New Netherlands, and this, of course, New York City was known as New Amsterdam, he was a man by the name of William Kieft. And the Director General, who was the representative of the Dutch West India Company, really did not want the newly formed religion of Quakerism to be a rising force in the New World, in the new colony. So it was John Bowne and his wife, Hannah Feek Bowne, who decided to lead the charge for not only for the advancement of the Quaker faith, but also of the faiths of all people. And it really begins here in Flushing in 1657. So around that time, in 1657, there is the drafting of what's known as the Flushing Remonstrance. But before we get to that, I just want to point out what we're looking at here. We are now at the Bowne House. Okay, this is the oldest structure in Queens, and I believe the second oldest standing home in the city of New York. The facility, in this home lived John Bowne and his wife, and it was here that he held meetings in secret, out of the view of the authorities, on Quakerism. Across the street, Jaron, if you can just go look across the street, we have a site known as the Fox Oaks, which is a little triangular rock. There it is. And that is from George Fox, who came from the Society of Friends, which would evolve into the Friends Meeting House. And that is where he held one of the first Quaker sermons in the New World, in that spot under those mighty oak trees that stood there more than 300 years ago. But in 1657, the residents of Flushing wanted to prove to the world their independence in terms of religious tolerance and freedom. Now, this is something that was very, very fascinating to learn about. You know, it predates the Declaration of Independence by well over 100 years. We have so in this document, we learn about the religious tolerance and freedom that really is the great gift that Flushing gives to the world. I have here an excerpt of the actual Flushing Remonstrance, the actual document. We are very fortunate, still exists to this day. I believe it is located in Albany in the archives, in the state archives. But I do have here an excerpt of what those citizens of Flushing wrote on December the 27th, 1657. And this document was presented to the head of the colony, Director Keefe, and excuse me, it was presented by two Flushing officials. One of them, I believe, was Edward Hart, and the other one was Tobias Feek, who was the sheriff of Flushing. And in this blessed document, he wrote, or they wrote rather, that, quote, the law of love, peace and liberty existing to Jews, Turks, and Egyptians as they are considered sons of Adam. We are all bound by the law of God and man to do good unto all men and evil unto no man. And then it concludes with, we shall remain your humble subjects of the inhabitants of Vlissingen. So Vlissingen was where the word Flushing comes from. It's a Dutch word. It means salt meadow. And then the word Flushing comes from Vlissingen, which is the English corruption of the word. Okay, so they pronounced it Flushing instead of Vlissing or Vlissingen. So that is an excerpt of the Remonstrance, and it was revolutionary for its time, and it still is, because as we mentioned, it's the precursor to the Constitution. Okay, and one of the major moments in Flushing history happened in 1662 when John Bowne was arrested for practicing Quakerism at the site in the home, which was all clandestine. It was all undercover. And he was brought before the new Director General of Flushing by the name of Petrus Stuyvesant. And Director General Stuyvesant really did not appreciate the fact that Mr. Bowne was holding these undercover meetings and that the religion of Quakerism was gaining a foothold, especially in the Flushing area. So he was banished to Holland. And while in Holland, where he, I believe, was banished for about 3 to 4 years, he appealed to the judges of the Dutch West India Company, who sided with him, okay, and permitted him to return to the colony. And when he came back, he was victorious. And from then on, there was a tolerance of Quakerism, for the most part, in Flushing from that point on. A few decades later, towards the end of his life, John Bowne and the early settlers of Flushing decided to erect a a church that would show their devotion to their Quaker faith. And we're going to go there right now. And this is one of the most historic facilities in the city of New York. And it's right here in Flushing on Northern Boulevard. And traffic seems light today. Very good. Okay. So there's the Quaker Meeting House, also known as the Friends Meeting House as it was organized by the Society of Friends. There is another meeting house of this type, which is also on Northern Boulevard, and it's in Manhasset, Long Island, about 10 minutes past the county line, okay, going eastbound. So this building was built in 1694. I believe it was added to it became a national landmark in 1967, and then I think in 1970, 71, it became a New York City landmark. The building contains a small churchyard in the back, and some of the beams inside of the building in the upper floor, the heavy beams that are just below the roof are actually made out of a ship's keel and have been in place for over 300 years. It's a magnificent specimen of a house of worship of its time, and it's beautifully preserved. Legend has it that John Bowne and his family are buried in the backyard, where there is a small cemetery or small churchyard. Fascinating to know is that this is still an active house of worship. You can go there every Sunday and pray. And it was during the Revolutionary War in 1776 that this building, for a brief time, stopped being used exclusively as a house of worship and was used as a garrison for the British soldiers. It was used as a prison, it was used as a barracks, and it was also used as a hospital. Flushing in those days, in the Revolutionary days, along with most of Queens County, was pro-Tory, which means that they were pro-British, all right? They sided with the king, and so this area, Flushing and also Jamaica, was a British stronghold during the Revolutionary War. Interesting fact on top of that to note that it was in Jamaica, Queens, where the British evacuated when they lost the war and the British were recalled to England. It was through Jamaica that they left the colony. But at any rate, here stands the Quaker Meeting House. And we're going to go, Jaron, do we have something? No, okay.
Not until the end.
Not until the end, gotcha. Okay, we're good. So we're going to, can we go to St. George's now? Why not? And just to point out, that's the Civil War obelisk on the left. And that's the Flushing Town Hall, 1866 in the background. This entire mall in between Northern Boulevard, the east and westbound lanes, that's called Monument Park. And it contains beautiful monuments dedicated to the soldiers of Flushing who fought valiantly in wars, including World War I and II, the Civil War, and also the Spanish-American War. There's the World War I monument. And that's the armory in the background.
All right. I might need a few more directions soon.
Oh, St. George, go towards Main Street.
Oop.
There you go. Hook a left on Main.
Oop, that's Union.
There it is. Okay. So there we see one of the other extremely old historic house of worship, not only for the city of New York, but also for Flushing. I mean, we're looking at a piece of history that goes, again, like the Quaker Meeting House, predates not this, but the physical building that we're looking at, but the mission in general predates the Revolutionary War. So here we see the beautiful St. George's Church, which is located on Main Street, Flushing, about 100 yards south of the Northern Boulevard. And this great structure that we are looking at was constructed at around 1854. Okay, so 1854 is when this structure was erected. There's the parsonage in the background, but the origins of this church actually begins, Jaron, in this area here, towards the rear of the church, is where the first church, the original structure, I must say, was erected in the 1700s. So in 1702 is when the mission was, I believe it was the mission of the Church of England came to the New World. I have here the three priests who were, or the three missionaries rather, sent from England, and they were the Reverend John Talbot, the Reverend Pat Gordon, and the Reverend George Keith, not to be confused with RKO Keith. But nonetheless, in 1702, they came to Flushing and tried to establish a parish from the Church of England here in Flushing. It took many decades for the facility to get underway. I believe towards the middle of the 1700s, 1746, between 1746 and 1750 is when the first church was erected. It was later on in that time that, the way that these churches were built was they were built primarily with funds from the mission that tried to establish the house of worship, and they were also built with private funds, so from affluent citizens of Flushing. One in which would be John Aspinwall. And Mr. Aspinwall, who was a who was a sea captain, donated 600 pounds. All right. I don't know what that is in today's money, but he donated that to the church for the erection of a steeple and for the acquiring of a bell for the bell tower. And I believe that the bell that is in the church today still says engraved on the metalwork, gift of John Aspinwall, gentleman, 1746. I hope that's true, because that's quite remarkable. The edifice that we are looking at now, which is built in the neo-Gothic fashion, as I mentioned before, was erected in 1854. And what else can we talk about? Oh, Jaron, if you go around just to the other side of the church to show the little churchyard, the little cemetery. Go, yeah, around the corner now. Do we see any tombstones? Yes, we do. There we go. So on the right side of the church is a small churchyard where some of the oldest parishioners are buried. Fascinating to note that the warden for this church was a famous individual from Whitestone, where I was born and raised, and that would be Francis Lewis, okay, who was the signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was the New York representative. Francis Lewis, along with his son, Francis Lewis Jr., they were both church wardens here and donated a lot of their time and their money to help develop the church and the mission. And the architect who helped build, actually, and I mentioned about the bell before, I mentioned 1745, it was 1760. 1760. So the in 1854, we have the version that we see today. An interesting note is that the steeple of the church was destroyed in 2010. Actually, this September, next month, is going to be 10 years that that steeple was destroyed. So that is not the original steeple from 1854. It was destroyed. There we go. Perfect. If we can go back to that. There we go. It was destroyed in a tornado, which struck the area in September of 2010. I had that day just finished a lecture at the Flushing Library on the history of Flushing, and I had left the area about an hour before the storm hit. And people who were in the area said that it was like extremely intense. A friend of mine who worked at QPTV actually ducked into his car and said that the car almost took off the ground from the wind. The winds were clocked in at almost 100 miles an hour. And there's several theories that it was either hit by a microburst, the steeple that is, or it was struck by lightning. Most likely it was struck by lightning, and the steeple fell over frontwards and fell onto Main Street. And luckily, no one was killed, which is a miracle. But it took a couple of years, and a new steeple was erected, and you could hardly tell that anything had ever happened to this very amazing historic structure. Okay, let's keep moving along. You want to go to the AME Church, Jaron? Sounds good. Thank you. Hello.
Sorry, one moment. All right. Let's go back in time again.
There we go. There we go. Okay. So we're looking at the AME Church. That's the African Methodist Episcopal Church of Macedonia. The church, the mission, was established here in Flushing in 1811. And again, it is one of the oldest churches standing, or that once stood in Flushing. There is the facility that we're looking at now that you have on your screen. This is an older photo, I believe, from 3 years ago. And this building, I think, has been since torn down for the building of the municipal lot, and also for a structure that's going to go there. But the amazing thing about the AME Church is that it tells the story. It taps into all of these religious structures. They tap into not only the cultural diversity of Flushing, but it taps into a little bit of the history of Flushing. Some recent, some ancient, and in this particular church, it taps into the ancient history of our great town, Flushing. So in 1811 is when it was established, and the church was primarily attended by not only by European people, but of course by freed slaves and also from Native Americans. And that's what I'm going to get to right now. You see, Flushing and also the North Shore of Long Island was inhabited by Native Americans, as was all of North America. And in Flushing, particularly, you had people who were a division of the Algonquin people, the Lenni Lenape, right? and they referred to the area as Metinakok, which means the place of the rolling hills or the hunting place. And Native Americans there is still a small community in Douglaston, Little Neck, further east of the eastern frontier of the county. The Native Americans in Flushing still remain. And in those days, about 200 years ago, there was a lot of intermarriage between that community and freed slaves. African American people have lived in the colony naturally since the time of the Dutch, and there was slavery, and there were a couple of slaves, a few slave plantations in Flushing and also the northern shore of Queens. These freed slaves, once they were given their liberation, established themselves towards the eastern part of Flushing, which today we know as the Alley, as Alley Pond, okay? And the reason this area was of great importance was because that's where Native Americans who they intermarried with lived. And the reason for this was also because it was the waterway that comes in from the Little Neck Bay. And the main form of employment was oystermen and digging for little neck clams and fishermen. All right. Also, this practice was done down by the Flushing Creek, right off of College Point Boulevard, where we have the bridge, the overpass over the creek. All right. That was another major fishing community that was predominantly inhabited by freed African Americans and also Native Americans. Another interesting point is that the church is also closely linked with a forgotten part of the history of Flushing, and that is something that we know that is nicknamed as Black Dublin. Now, Black Dublin was an area along Roosevelt Avenue between Main and College Point Boulevard. Between Main Street and College Point Boulevard, that stretch of Roosevelt Avenue, that area was known as Black Dublin, okay? And the reason it was known this, referred to as this, was because of the area was inhabited by African Americans and also Irish people. And they lived amongst each other. They also intermarried, and the area was known as Black Dublin. The church, one of the, and a majority or a good portion of the parishioners at the AME Church resided in this area that was nicknamed by the community as Black Dublin. In 1927, that entire area was demolished for the coming of the IRT 7 train. It was 1926, 1927, when the tunnel, was being dug underneath Flushing as the line was extended from Willets Point into Flushing. And the city claimed that the vibration of the drilling and the subterranean construction would weaken the foundation of the homes, which were made primarily out of wood and therefore had to be torn down. So that was the end of Black Dublin. And there you see, the AME Church, and I believe 2013, before its demolition. All right. You want to go to the, where should we go next? You want to go to St. Michael's Catholic Church?
All right. I'll need directions.
Directions. Oof.
I can always just search.
Can you just look it up? Thank you.
St. Michael's.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
Actually, Sharon, do me a favor, go to Ebeneezer Baptist Church.
Is it?
Yep.
All right.
Is that it?
Looks like it.
That is Ebeneezer, yep. So here we're looking at the Ebeneezer Baptist Church. All right. Ebeneezer Baptist Church is located right off of off of the Northern Boulevard on Prince Street. So if you're going eastbound on Northern, you make a right on Prince, and it's about 100 feet up on the right-hand side. This church, I believe, was rebuilt many years ago after it was destroyed in a fire. What happened?
Just trying to get a good angle.
This is a very, very active walking tour. So this is Ebeneezer, okay? And this is another church that was tied into the African-American history, the freed slave history of Flushing. Interesting to note, and we'll probably hear this again later in the tour, that Flushing was a stop on the Underground Railroad. The Bowne House, the Quaker Meeting House, and I believe the Aspinwall House. Okay, remember John Aspinwall, the Aspinwall family from St. George's, right? The Aspinwall home, which was on Northern, in between the Armory and the Quaker Meeting House, and today it used to be a Korean restaurant, 24-hour Korean restaurant. That was a stop on the Underground Railroad. All right. There's an interesting story of a place that existed in Flushing, right where Citi Field and Shea Stadium were formerly located. And that place was called St. Ronan's Well. And this area was actually a swampy area that was on a type of a hill or a tree-covered mound. And whenever it rained, the waters of the Flushing Bay would rise and it would become a virtual island. And in those days, because it was very swampy and not very accessible, slaves who were part of the Underground Railroad network were hidden on this island, which would hundreds of years later become the area where Citi Field is located today, the home of the Mets. But the Ebeneezer Church also, as I mentioned, is tied in to the history of the Black community of Flushing and also in Black Dublin, which in this area is where Black Dublin was partially situated. And then a little bit more south of this is where that neighborhood was located. Do you want to head, let's head to St. Michael's now.
All right.
So on Union Street, I believe. Yep, there it is. Okay, so we're looking at the beautiful St. Michael's Catholic Church. It was founded in 1833 is when the parish was founded. And it was around 1854 that the church was built. The first St. Michael's Church was built, which coincided with the construction of St. George's. All right, so 1854, same time. And also another representation of the amazing religious sites of Flushing. Catholicism, Buddhism, everything is observed. You can find it in Flushing, Queens. I want to mention, now that we're talking about St. Michael's Catholic Church, we recently, we're going to go, Jared, do we have time to visit St. Andrew's, Avellino? Yeah?
Yeah, we should be able to.
Yeah, let's try to get that in because I wanna mention it.
Say it again.
St. Andrew, Avellino.
The school. Here we go.
So this is St. Andrew, Avellino. We're coming a little bit outside of the downtown area of Flushing now, and we're heading into Broadway Flushing on Northern Boulevard. And the really cool thing about this church is that one of our former board members by the name of Joe Brostick. Joe unfortunately passed away in April he was a longtime board member. He was the person who sponsored me to originally come onto the board. And he was a parishioner here at St. Andrew, Avellino for many, many years. So we're stopping by this site today in honor of Joe Brostick. Joe was very active in the community. He helped name or recognize the library, which is located across the street and a little bit further west on Northern, the McGoldrick branch of the Queen's Library, which was named after Father McGoldrick of St. Andrew, Avellino. And he had a plaque installed in the lobby of the McGoldrick Library because McGoldrick was one of the driving forces that helped expand the parish of St. Andrew, Avellino here in Flushing, and people really didn't know who he was. I learned from Joe Brostick who he was, and that McGoldrick Library was directly tied with St. Andrew, Avellino. So we stopped here in memory of Joe Brostick. But right now we're going to take a look at some of the other sites. We're going to hop around a little bit, and we're going to go to see some of the other cultures, the other religions represented here in Greater Flushing. And we're going to take a little ride south to the Kissena Jewish Center.
The Free Synagogue? Or Jewish
No,
Center?
Kissena Jewish Center, because the Free Synagogue is going to talk a little later, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll let them
Okay, there it is.
talk. So there's the Kissena Jewish Center. The Kissena Jewish Center this year is actually celebrating its 70th anniversary. It was established in 1950. The Jewish community of Flushing has been in Flushing since the 1660s. As we mentioned before, that the Flushing Remonstrance, right, recognized the religious freedom of Jews, Turks, and Egyptians. Now they're using the language, the Quakers in the 1650s, right? They're using the language of their day. They're referring to Jewish people and to Middle Eastern people to practice their religion in the New World, which was extraordinary that the Remonstrance mentioned these groups because they were such a minority in those days, in the 1650s, 1660s, that to even mention them is miraculous, you know, because the Remonstrance really wanted to involve and incorporate everybody and to make it a religious utopia in a way here in New Amsterdam. So Kissena Jewish Center is, I believe, Orthodox Jewish denomination. As I mentioned, it was established in 1950, so they're celebrating 70 years of service to the community. There is a strong Jewish presence in Flushing as you travel southward on Main Street and you come down by Jewel Avenue by Parsons Boulevard, by Kissena. Main Street is what we called growing up as Jewish Main Street. And this here Main Street is predominantly occupied by people of the Orthodox Jewish faith. Although I myself also practice Judaism, I do not practice Orthodox section of Judaism. My family actually came here in 1913, 1912, from Russia, from Moscow. And they lived, my great-grandparents lived on the corner of Broome and Allen in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So we're going to visit one of the most historic sites of Judaism in Flushing with the Free Synagogue of Flushing, but we're gonna have a video of that that's going to be later in the presentation, right, Sharon?
Yes, I believe so.
Very good, very good. So let's keep exploring. Let's go to the Boon Church of the Overseas Chinese Mission.
All right. It's just further down the street.
Yeah.
Before we go on, we had a question about the St. Michael's Catholic Church earlier, of when that building might have dated to. Is it from the 60s?
St. Michael's, I believe, is from the early 60s.
Okay. And we'll answer the other questions during
Sure.
the Q&A section. All right, we're here.
With the Boon Church. So, Boon Church of the Overseas Chinese Mission is located right here in front of you. The facility has been around for many years. I remember when I was in high school, I had a couple of classmates who attended this particular church, and the Boon Church of Overseas Chinese Missions, which is right here on Bowne, I believe was the 45th.
Yes, 45th and Bowne.
Yep. So this facility, which was established many years ago, well, I guess it must be around 30 or 40 years by now, probably more. This area, you have a beautiful building right here on the corner, but we'll mention that in another tour. So the Overseas Chinese Mission, this particular church, from what I learned, is the first church of this particular mission established in the United States. They have 7 missions or churches located in this country, but that being the Church of Overseas Chinese Mission. But this, of the 7, this one, the Boon Church, is the first one. Although it is a Asian American church, like all houses of worship, just like the Quaker Meeting Home, just like the Free Synagogue of Flushing, is welcome to all people of all cultures and backgrounds to come and attend the services. You want to go to? Let's go now to the Hindu temple. The Asian population in Flushing, which now is a major driving force in our area, in the neighborhood of Flushing, started in the late 50s, early 1960s, and grew through the 70s and through the 80s. And it was another element of the ever-evolving cultural landscape of Flushing. As someone who has lived in Flushing his entire life and who had gone to high school in Flushing, I went to Robert F. Kennedy High School in Flushing on Parsons Boulevard. Had grown up living and exploring downtown Flushing ever since I was in the seventh grade. So I watched as a young man growing up the ever evolving background of Flushing, and my family, who has lived here for 60 plus years, was witness to the ever growing population and changing population of this very special neighborhood. And here we come to a very special place, a place that I have recently learned a lot about, and very most fascinating history. What we're looking at is the Hindu temple in Flushing. And it is the Hindu temple that it was built on. It actually opened on, it was dedicated on July 4th on Independence Day, 1977. And it is built, and it bills itself as the first authentic Hindu temple constructed in America, as it adheres to the strict guidelines of the building of such an edifice. The granite stone that you see above the entryways was imported from India and then installed here at the facility. So it has been here since 1977. It was built on the site of I believe it was a Russian Orthodox church. If anybody knows the name of the church, if you just post it for us later in the conversation, that'll help us out a lot. But it was erected on the site of a Russian Orthodox church. And we're going to hear towards the end of the tour from the Ganesh Hindu temple. Hello. And we're going to go and enjoy some video tours in a moment. So let's see what else could we cover, Jaron? Do we have time for any more, or just?
I think it's about time to switch over to some inside videos.
Okay.
So if you want to introduce a couple of our representative guests.
Sure. Do you you have the name, Jaron? If you want to introduce them, that's okay.
All right. So from the Ganesh Hindu temple, we have Ravi, and we've got Liz Giorgio from the Friends Meeting House. Unfortunately, Souks from the Flushing Free Synagogue couldn't attend, but he did send a video in his stead, so we'll be watching that later. Our lovely partners have taken some time to bring some of their own words to talk about their places of worship. And so we're going to watch a couple of videos that will take you inside, and we'll hear from Ravi as well as Souks. So I'm going to switch which screens I'm sharing. So give me just a couple of seconds to switch over. All right, you should see someone at a gate right now. Can you guys see that? All right. So I'm gonna make sure that I play this with sound. All right.
Welcome to the Flushing Friends Meeting House. Thank you for joining us on this virtual tour, and I hope you'll come join us on a physical tour when it's safe to do so, and maybe come to experience Quaker meeting.
The first thing you might notice when you enter the gate is the stark contrast between busy Northern Boulevard and Main Street, which is just half a block away from the peaceful garden inside the gate. The next thing you might wonder about is why there's no entrance to the building facing Northern Boulevard. There's an analogy to Quaker worship and the reason for that. The central belief of Quakers is that every human being has an inner light, and when Quakers worship, they sit as a community in silence, turning inward to receive divine guidance. Sometimes people rise to share a spiritual message as well, but it makes sense that you would turn away from the busyness of the world in order to do that. So John Bowne purchased and donated the land for this burial ground in 1676. There are over 140 Quakers recorded as being buried here, but early Quakers did not use headstones, so there are many more people than stones. John Bowne and his family are buried here, as are the abolitionists William Burling and Matthew Franklin. Behind the garden, there's a plaque commemorating 2 visits that George Washington made to Flushing Meeting. Turning toward the entrance to the meeting house, you may notice a new banner and the boxes. Just a word about that. Aside from the belief in the inner light, Quakers do not have a creed. Instead, they have testimonies that are sometimes referred to as spices: simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. The belief in the inner light is at the heart of the Quaker belief in equality. And although I mentioned that Quakers turn inward to prayer, they believe that they must go out into the world to act upon the divine guidance that they have received. The Quaker testimonies account for the reason that Quakers have been historically at the forefront of the abolition movement, women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, and movements for equality that continue to this day. The boxes are here because several members of the meeting participate in a food co-op. They come here to distribute organic food. This is just one example of stewardship that's an important part of the Quaker spices. In 1657, a Quaker named Henry Townsend was arrested, imprisoned, and fined for holding Quaker meetings in his home. The area was under the jurisdiction of Peter Stuyvesant, who thought that everyone should belong to the Dutch Reformed Church and had forbidden anyone from holding a Quaker meeting or hosting a Quaker in one's home. In response to this persecution, the town clerk, the sheriff, and 28 other settlers drafted a document calling for religious freedom and an end to religious persecution. That document is known as the Flushing Remonstrance, and it was signed December 27, 1657. The town clerk was jailed and banished, and the other signers were heavily fined. It is worth noting that several signers of this important document later became Quakers. John Bowne, whose wife Hannah Feek had become a Quaker, allowed Quaker meetings to take place in his home despite knowing the risks. This led to his arrest, imprisonment, and a fine that he refused to pay. John Bowne also refused to leave when his prison cell door was left open. This led to his banishment. He was put on a boat to Holland, but was told that he could get off wherever he wished. After going to Ireland and England, he made his way to Holland, where he met with the representatives of the Dutch West India Company that had granted the charter to establish the settlement of Flushing. There, he presented his case for religious freedom. As a result, the Dutch West India Company sent a letter to Peter Stuyvesant in 1663, ending the persecution of Quakers and establishing the right to religious freedom and freedom of conscience. So the Flushing Remonstrance is seen by many as a precursor to the Bill of Rights, drafted over 100 years before our Constitution was adopted in 1787. This worship room is the oldest part of the meeting house, which is the oldest house of worship in New York State and the second oldest in the country that has been in continuous use. That continuous use includes a period when British soldiers occupied this room during the Revolutionary War. The benches are not quite as old as the meeting house because the British soldiers burnt the original benches and a picket fence for firewood. The British soldiers used this room as a stable, a storage room, and as a hospital. The benches are still quite old, and in this close-up, you will see that the carved graffiti is so old that the initials of this person were carved with serifs at the tip of the letters.
The ceiling was originally open with gallery seating all around. It was enclosed to create a school upstairs that was open to children of all backgrounds. In 1717, the meeting house was enlarged to accommodate more people. This wall consists of panels that could be lowered to accommodate separate meetings and raised to accommodate a very large meeting. Quakerism is remarkable for considering all of its members to be clergy, and women were considered equal to men in their ministry. In the larger world, women had different spheres of activity than men, so the women would meet on that side of the panel when necessary, but the panels could be raised to form one large meeting when needed.
As we come around into this room, now used as a social room, we can see several displays about Quaker history. On this wall are many different peacemakers from different cultures throughout history. We'll focus for another minute or two on John Woolman, who is a very important figure in Quaker history. When he was a young man, John Woolman worked as a clerk in a shop. In the course of his work, he was once told to write up a bill of sale for a person who was sold into slavery. Although he did as he was told, this action preyed on his conscience and helped him lead to become one of the most important abolitionists in the Society of Friends. John Woolman's convictions were so strong that he began to wear undyed clothing because he knew that slave labor was used to make indigo on plantations in the production of dyes. He traveled up and down the eastern part of the U.S. visiting Quaker meetings, including Flushing meeting, to try and convince others that holding slaves was incompatible with Quaker beliefs. One last story about this beloved Quaker is that when he set sail for England to preach against the evils of slavery there, he found that the cabin door was decorated with a hand-carved embellishment. Because of his deep convictions about the connection between luxuries and the exploited labor needed to produce them, he refused to sleep in that cabin and made the trip sailing in steerage. John Woolman's deep conviction helped to convince many friends. It is worth noting that the Quakers of Flushing meeting formally declared slavery to be incompatible with Christianity in 1767, almost 100 years before the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. There are two additional things to note in this room. The first is a display that marks the visit of George Fox, the founder of the Religious Society of Friends, to the Bowne House in 1672. George Fox preached a sermon under 2 oak trees. Here we have a piece of one of the trees and a piece of the stone marker that replaced the trees, presumably after they withered. It was after a long period of searching that George Fox came to believe that no person needed an intermediary to connect with the divine, and this is at the heart of Quaker beliefs. Another thing to note is the architectural support known as a ship's knee. It is the natural right angle formed between a tree trunk and a branch, or a tree trunk and its root. There's one down here and more upstairs. We will take a quick trip up to the second floor of the meeting house. This is where the children's meetings are held. Here are 2 additional ship's knees. You can also see that there are several extraordinarily long wooden beams that span the length of the meeting house. They are made of white oak. It is perhaps fitting to end our tour with a reproduction of the Flushing Remonstrance. The edges were burned in a fire, but thankfully this plea for religious freedom survives today.
The Flushing Friends Meeting House was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1967 and a New York City landmark in 1970. Thank you for joining. Perhaps one day you'll return to visit in person, maybe experience a Quaker meeting, and then enjoy some coffee and fellowship afterwards before sampling some of the amazing food that can be found here in Flushing. When the COVID crisis subsides, Friends will resume meeting here every Sunday at 11 a.m. They also offer tours of the building after meeting at 12 p.m. Thank you again.
Wow.
This is about Hindu temple. You can play.
Yeah.
This is a Hindu temple at 4557 Bowne Street. This is a sky view of the whole premises. This is the entrance on the Holy Avenue. All these pillars, 16 pillars are there, which are black granite stone. This is a complete exterior view of the whole temple from the Bowne Street side. This is the rear side of the temple. Exterior, all are exterior view. This is the northern side of the temple exterior view. This is the front gate on the Holy Avenue entrance. Can you play the PowerPoint so that I can explain about the history of the temple? Yeah. So the temple is located in 4557 Bowne Street. You can click the slideshow, it will be easier. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about the history behind the exact location of the temple and its main street. It's very interesting to note. In fact, Mr. Jason was asking about the history. So this is very important landmark of the Hindu temple. Next, please. Jaren, you will, okay. See, Flushing, we know, no, it has a document history of about 350 years. John Bowne, all of us knows about his historic effort, paved the way for people of all faiths to practice their religion freely outside their homes without fear of being persecuted. The historic achievement of obtaining religious freedom set a kind of precedent, and Flushing, which was known as Vlissingen at that time, a heaven for religious freedom and tolerance. See, Queens now is the most ethnically diverse country in the US, diverse county in the US, with Flushing at epicenter, and new waves of immigrants have brought new traditions. Bowne Street in particular is now a home of religious plurality and tolerance. Next. So the history here starts in 1890. There was a first Baptist church of Flushing in the same premises, which was built, and it was called as Park Branch on what was then called, at that time, it was called as Bowne Avenue and Hitchcock Park, where it was, in fact, this church was declared as a neat chapel. So it is depicted as such even in the 1904 Atlas of Queens. It is available. Next. In 1919, the structure then became the site of the first Church of Nazarene, which was existing till 1954, when it moved to another location nearby, and the old building was sold to become a Russian Orthodox Church of Holy Annunciation. Next. The Russian Orthodox Church decided to move later to a larger space, and hence this property went on market for the last time in 1971. The Hindu Temple Society of North America procured that property to establish an authentic Hindu temple. Next. While planning was set to build the temple, worship commenced in a makeshift place with the blessings of one of the famous sage called Kanchi Shankaracharya, who offered a small idol made of arka. This arka is generally known as the giant milkweed in English, and the botanical name is Calostrophis of Gigantine. The wood does not decompose. Till this date, it is preserved as a presiding deity inside the main shrine. Of course, the construction of the temple began in 1973 with the unwavering support of the community and completed in 1977. Next. Being the first of its kind construction in a very stringent weather condition of New York, a group of 40 odd sthapatis, they are called as temple artisans, who are known for constructing Hindu temples in Asian countries using a black granite stone, which is removed from a big mountain, and it's constructed. So they worked along with the American Union labor, and the temple got built, and the consecration ceremony was fixed for July 4, 1977, which was considered at that year as a very auspicious day as per Hindu calendar. It also coincides with the American Independence Day. During the construction process, and also during the post-consecration of the temple, there were considerable amount of vandalism from few misleading elements from the neighborhood, to whom the Hinduism was practically unknown. And for them it looks strange to them. They felt it to be a cult. However, with the grace of Supreme Being, many of them, including the local and city and state authorities, began to express and appreciate our interest, and also join hand with us in celebrating Hindu festivals and exchange greetings during holiday seasons, leading to a friendship with neighbors. Next. Now the temple caters to the local community by establishing an outreach center, which is just exactly opposite to the temple. And we also have a very big community center, a senior center, authentic vegan canteen. We have a weekend school which concentrate on Hindu culture, music, dance, yoga, meditation, and all. Next. This was a temple when it was built, which was consecrated in 1977. Of course, it underwent a lot of renovation and expansion. Next. So this was in 2009. It was expanded and renovated. Next. This is another view of the temple when it was reconsecrated in 2009. Next. So there are about 12 priests who serve. Of course, here we have all day service. All 7 days services keep happening. So the priests does services both inside the temple, and also they also go out at the Hindus' houses. They perform religious services. Next. This is the inside the temple. So at the center, you will find a huge, which is only what you see in the photo is only 1/3 of the height of the black granite stone. Could you zoom it a little so that people can have a closer view of the center portion of this? Okay. So the granite thing which is built without using any adhesive chemicals or cement like that. So a very ancient technology was used in constructing this main. There are 5 shrines inside the main prayer hall. And on the top of this, you will find a tomb-like thing which is viewable from outside. And these stone blocks were built in such a way that, it gets interlocked with each other. So it can withstand any kind of weather condition, any atmosphere. It will never break, and it will never, even including if earthquake has to happen in the same place, it will not break. Such was the beauty of the construction. And this kind of construction will withstand for more than 5,000 years, where we have still seen this kind of building in Asian countries. Next. This is the front view. This is the backside view of the inside hall of the structure. Next. Of course, these are all the shrines which is inside each shrine. We have the deities, which is the attribute of the Supreme God in different forms. There are different forms of deities. As you have a human form, you have a human and animal form, you have a symbolic form of Supreme Being. So Hinduism has got different way of depicting the Supreme Being. So next, of course, these are all sculpted again in single black granite stone. All are carved out of single stone. Here it's not a multiple stone. In a single stone, it is carved. Next. There are totally 6 such single stone idols. Of course, all are decorated with beautiful ornaments and silk clothes, and important parts of the sculptures are covered with silver coverings, and all pure silver is used here to cover. Next. This is the 6th one. Yeah, next. Of course, temple also have a huge chariot, a car built with silver, pure silver, which is used during festivals. Of course, this is August is the month where annual celebration happens. This year, due to COVID situation, we are not bringing out this parade with this. It's a 60 feet tall silver chariot, which used to come out. Actually, if the things would have been normal from 14th of August till 23rd, we would have had the festival. You could have not had the opportunity of seeing this festival. Next. This is the last year's festival I have taken, which goes on the road. It comes to the main street, and whole Bowne Street from one end to other end, it goes about 4 or 5 miles it covers and comes back. The chariot you can see at the back, it's about 60 feet tall chariot, silver chariot, which is pulled by a car. Yeah. Next. So during the festival, we bring animals because Hindus respect all living beings are equal. For us, soul is matter than the outlook of the soul. outlook. We are all like a human being. There are souls in animals, souls in plants and trees. We treat everything as a soul. So we bring animals during the festival time and respect them and feed them food. In fact, last year this happened. We bring a cow and feed them. Everyone will have opportunity to feed. And once in 12 years, we celebrate a reconsecration celebration. At that time, even wild animals are brought to the temple. You must have seen in 2009, we brought a live elephant to the temple. And it was parked in the temple and people had joyful time with elephant. And of course, next year, we are going to have next 12th year one. We hope government will allow us to bring elephant to the temple. So that's about thing. Next. So that's about our temple. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So next we're going to see a video from the Flushing Free Synagogue. Unfortunately, Souks was not able to make it, but he still produced this video for us that will go over a little bit of contextual history of Flushing and the history of Reformed Judaism in New York. Let me also double check that I am playing the sound correctly. Yes. And okay.
The Free Synagogue of Flushing was established in 1917 and is the oldest Reformed synagogue in Queens and Long Island. So the synagogue has quite a lot of history. To put that in perspective, we've seen 2 pandemics, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and the Great Recession. Flushing is also a neighborhood that has experienced something similar to what happened down on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The synagogue was founded by the Hebrew Women's Aid Society. The group provided comfort and aid to the small Jewish population living in Flushing at the time. Through their services, they saw a need to establish a religious school operating on liberal lines while focusing on making better Jews and better Americans. On October 31st, 1917, the Society sent out a letter asking recipients to attend a meeting to discuss the creation of a new school. It was estimated the cost would be around $500, or $10,000 today. By the end of the night, they raised $1,500. Pretty amazing. A lot of the donations came from wealthy Jewish merchants with businesses in Flushing. With their goal met and with the excess funds, it was suggested that the society establish a synagogue. And so, here we are today. Flushing is one of the oldest settlements in what is now New York City. It is also one of the original 3 colonial settlements comprising Queens. Flushing traces its roots to English settlers who received a patent in 1654 from Mr. Stuyvesant, governor of the Dutch colony. Early in the town's history, Flushing residents stood together in support of a local Quaker community to protest the religious intolerance of Governor Stuyvesant. They drafted a document called the Flushing Remonstrance. The document from 1657 remains as one of the earliest published defenses of freedom of religion in the United States. If you've been to Flushing, you'll notice the streets are named after various plants, but also 2 well-known horticulturists. During the 17th century, Flushing developed as a major center for horticulture. William Prince started Flushing's first nursery in 1737. Samuel Parson also had established a nursery in 1838. Parson's nursery also provided trees to the city's first public parks, among them including Central Park and Prospect Park. As in the rest of Queens, Flushing's fortunes evolved with the improvements in transportation. The introduction of regular train service to New York City in 1854 led to the post-Civil War boom in luxury home construction for wealthy New Yorkers. The extension of the trolley lines into Flushing from 1888 to 1899 and the electrification of the Long Island Railroad helped turn Flushing into a commuter suburb. From the 1890s until the outbreak of World War I, Flushing saw its estates divided up into new suburban developments. Perhaps the biggest impetus to the growth of Flushing and Queens in general was the opening in 1909 of the Queensboro Bridge that connected Queens and Midtown Manhattan. Also significant was the extension of the IRT into the borough during the 1910s. Flushing was touted as a place where the home life, the social life, and the religious life are at their best. Over the next 2 decades, the population of Queens mushroomed by 750%. The boom continued well into the 1920s. Although the city's Jewish population was enormous, the pre-World War I Jewish population of Queens was quite small. In 1913, New York City's Jewish population was estimated at around 1.3 million. Of that number, only 23,000 lived in Queens. Synagogues played a major role in the life of New York City's Jewish population. By 1918, New York's Jewish population was estimated at between 1 and 1.5 million and was served by 700 synagogues. In that year, West Queens had just one synagogue in one building, while East Queens had 18 synagogues, only 5 of which had their own buildings. Flushing's first synagogue was most likely the Temple Gates of Prayer, a conservative synagogue established in 1902. The Free Synagogue of Flushing was the neighborhood's second. Much of Jewish immigration was stopped with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924. It wasn't until post-World War II that Flushing's Jewish population started to take off again, with returning Army GIs buying homes and starting families, but also those seeking a suburban lifestyle. The post-war boom was considered to be the synagogue's golden years, with membership at its peak. Especially once the aftermath of the Holocaust was revealed, synagogues saw participation among Jews jump from 20% to 60%. So, here's the million-dollar question. What does it mean to be free? The Free Synagogue of Flushing took its name from the Free Synagogue, founded by Rabbi Stephen Wise in Manhattan. It all started when, in 1905, Rabbi Wise was approached to become the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel, perhaps New York City's wealthiest and most prominent Reform congregation. But he had run afoul of the congregation's leaders by giving a trial sermon on social justice and various progressive causes that directly challenged the thinking and doings of several prominent members. In the negotiations that followed, Wise insisted that if he took the pulpit, he would be free to speak his mind. The answer he received? The pulpit of Temple Emmanuel has always been and is subject to and under the control of the Board of Trustees. That meant that he could not accept the position, but he had already decided to create a new kind of synagogue, a free synagogue. In 1906, in an interview with the New York Tribune, Rabbi Wise laid out 3 core principles that are now a part of the Free Synagogue of Flushing's heritage. First, no assigned pews, a democratic arrangement which recognizes the equality of all worshipers and does not discriminate in favor of position or wealth. Second, no fixed dues. The synagogue is supported by voluntary contributions, members being expected to contribute in accordance with their means. And finally, a free pulpit. The occupant of the pulpit, regular or visiting, has the complete freedom of speech and assumes sole responsibility for their utterances. The congregation, on the other hand, having the right to accept or reject, in whole or in part, the message delivered. In a word, the synagogue, in its spirit and organization, is free, democratic, and liberal. Rabbi Wise intended to reach out to unaffiliated Jews. He envisioned the Free Synagogue as a place of moral instruction for Jews. His approach to the service included significant changes, such as the elimination of the Torah reading and the scheduling of Shabbat services on Sunday to supplement those traditionally held on Friday evening and Saturday morning. And that was because many workers didn't have the standard 2-day weekend until the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. But to Wise's mind, the most important aspect of the Free Synagogue would be its devotion to the cause of ethical teaching and social justice. Since 1917, the synagogue has always been a place of action. As you already know, one of the founding principles is freedom of the pulpit. This meant that we had many guest clergy from various religious backgrounds delivering sermons that addressed the needs of their community. And soon after, their needs became a focus of the Jewish community. Our pulpit has played host to many civil rights leaders, politicians, musicians, and many other personalities, savory and unsavory. Through social action, the synagogue has been a part of many historical events and moments that have shaped American society. From suffrage to war efforts, disease and famine, civil rights, worker rights, and gender equality. The synagogue has also hosted many outside organizations, providing them with space to pursue action. During the Great Depression, the synagogue was turned into a soup kitchen, and during World War II, the synagogue served as a casualty center for the Red Cross. And up until recently, we provided space for an abused women's group providing counseling. Most of their clientele were women from the Muslim faith. Eventually, they outgrew the space and moved on. Thanks to our new rabbi, Rabbi Gale, our synagogue is poised to become a sanctuary within a sanctuary, meaning that the Free Synagogue has become a sanctuary for counterculture. We are the antithesis of what we are seeing in today's society, which is bigotry, divisiveness, hatred, and prejudice. So that kind of gives you an idea of how far we've come as a congregation, but also where we're headed in the next 100 years. The experience made me rethink what sanctuary means today. The Free Synagogue of Flushing is comprised of two buildings. One is a pre-Civil War mansion, and the second a sanctuary built in the early 20th century. The Samuel Vernon Mann property is a 19th century mansion that the synagogue used for services in the early years and before moving into a new multi-purpose built sanctuary completed in 1927. In 1917, the congregation first met at the Odd Fellows Hall. Then, in 1921, the congregation acquired the Samuel Vernon Mann property. Their immediate plans called for the remodeling of the first floor of the homestead so that the building could be used as a place of worship. The Mann property is over 161 years old. It includes a large house, parts of which date back to 1859. But the building appeared to have been remodeled in the 1890s. Based on the evidence from historical maps, a frame house with a French-style roof and 2.5 stories tall was built on the site in 1859 for Flushing merchant Robert Carter. It was purchased in 1870 by Mary Hoffman, the wife of attorney and jurist Murray Hoffman. He's best known for the Hoffman Rule, which created a formula regarding property value and is still in use today. In 1891, the property passed on to Samuel Vernon Mann, husband to the daughter of the Onderdonk Cogswell family. Mann, a prominent currency broker, collected 18th century furniture. So it's probably at this time that the colonial revival style alterations to the house were made. In 1921, when Mann sold the house to the synagogue, the New York Times reported on the sale, describing the house as a 15-room house considered to be one of the best examples of Southern colonial architecture on Long Island. Today, the building houses our offices, our current religious school, and space for organizations providing community service. Between 1923 and 1930, Flushing's Jewish community quadrupled in size. It went from around 1,000 to over 4,000. By 1924, the newly acquired Mann Mansion was already too small for the growing congregation. In a letter from the congregation's president, Mr. Siemens explained the need for a new building. He said, "As a member of the congregation, you undoubtedly recognize that the last High Holy Day service, and since then, the need for larger quarters. In those services, there were 330 people, while our building only seats 120. Even on Friday evenings, often there have not been enough seats to accommodate our members. The Sunday school fills every nook and corner of the building to overflowing, not alone as to seats, but standing as well. So much so that our rabbi has announced that no more children may be registered as they cannot be accommodated. The building committee requested that an architect by the name of Maurice Corlin prepare plans for the new facilities. The building would have a seating capacity of upwards of 650 in the sanctuary, and downstairs a social hall accommodating 400. The committee estimated that the cost of the new building would be approximately $165,000 to $175,000, around $2.6 million today. The total cost ended up being around $250,000. The Free Synagogue Sanctuary is an example of neoclassical revival style building. Its design is typical of early 20th century modern American synagogues, combining classical details with Jewish symbols. Above the main entrance to the colonnade, there's an English inscription from Isaiah, "For my house shall be a house of prayer for all people," a quotation particularly appropriate for the mission of the Free Synagogue. Inside the sanctuary is a large domed space without a separate gallery to serve as a women's section, reflecting the egalitarian theological position of the Reform movement. The leaded glass windows with Jewish themes add light to the space, while the crowning shallow dome that covers most of the space has a leaded glass skylight with a Jewish star in the center. Another feature of the synagogue includes a pipe organ, which became central to early Free Synagogue Sabbath services. The synagogue is one of only a few early surviving 20th century synagogues with a traditional pipe organ. Today, the sanctuary is still in use and hosts many Jewish life cycle rituals and celebrations. Up through the 1950s, Flushing still had a large Jewish presence. A long-serving rabbi said that when he had arrived at the synagogue, the membership included more than 500 families. Flushing had many Jewish-owned businesses, as well as delicatessens and kosher butchers, like the early days of the Lower East Side. In recent decades, however, while the Jewish population of Queens has grown enormously, the Jewish population of Flushing has declined significantly. As the population in Flushing evolved and the Jewish community changed, the Free Synagogue worked to adapt to the changing environment. The synagogue had to take a look at the cultural and social integration of American Jews, but also, what does a Jew look like today? Going on to 103 years, the Free Synagogue has been a bastion of liberal thought and social activism. The congregation continues to welcome all people, interfaith couples, straight, gay, every ethnicity and heritage, spanning the generations, with an elderly contingent as well as families with young children. Today, the synagogue remains a vibrant Reform congregation, drawing congregants from many parts of the borough. The synagogue reflects the history of Jews in Queens in the 20th century, especially the history of the Reform movement. The Free Synagogue remains a vital part of its living history, of its neighborhood, and of its city, and is intent on being a part of the neighborhood's future. Thank you for listening and learning about the synagogue's history. Please visit our website and take a virtual tour of our sanctuary. All right, bye-bye.
All right. So that was Soukshavat Soukhaseum. So he's the representative of the Flushing Free Synagogue. So we're gonna start opening up to some Q&A. So I want to reintroduce Ravi Vaidyanaat. If I pronounced that incorrectly, please feel free to.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. We've got Liz, Giorgio, and also, sorry, I didn't get to introduce you earlier, Jeffery Guyton from the Flushing Meeting House. So I encourage all of the participants who are here, please post some questions into chat and we'll try and get through them in order. So that way we can answer any of your questions. I want to first start, though, with a couple of questions that we got before the Q&A section started. And that was to Ravi, if the stone was hand-carved or was it done by machine?
all are by hand carved. As per the construction rule, we have used the ancient one. See, 500 years ago, we never had electricity, we never had mechanical cranes and things like that. So we adopted the same principle. So it was all hand carved. Maximum tool the artisan used was hammer and chisels.
All right. Also, the this might be one for Jason. Has the Temple Gates of Prayer building been destroyed? I was asked earlier if that was endangered still.
I'm not too sure.
I know Souks isn't here to really answer this question from Mitchell, but maybe Jason, you're familiar with it. The current status of the Manhoffman Mansion, that it was potentially endangered. Is that still a protected building, or?
And where is that?
I believe that's part of the Flushing Free Synagogues.
That is I'm sorry, the mansion that's behind the synagogue, the facility. Yes, that was from the mid 1800s. From what I know, it is protected. It is part of the. It's a black and white home that is situated behind the property. It is, from what I understand, protected along with the synagogue, but I don't know. There it is to the left. You got it. If it has undergone any major overhaul in the past few years, in recent years rather. But from what I understand, it's not in any danger of being torn down.
Okay. We have a question here from Ernie Rubenstein. Do any of the congregations have any interfaith exchanges or programs with mosques here in Flushing?
Yeah, we have Intertemple are part of both local, like we have part of, we are in fact, I myself is a board member in Flushing Interfaith Council and Interfaith Center of New York, and also federal.
Thanks, Ravi. I did just want to say sometimes I see Ravi at the Flushing monthly meetings,
yes.
Interfaith meetings at 8 a.m. the first Sunday of every month, and we have people from every faith across Flushing get together. We usually have some spiritual question before us, which everyone answers through their lens. It's a great experience. And thank you, Ravi, for your awesome presentation today.
Thank you.
Okay. And by the way, have Ravi, or not Ravi, sorry, Jeffrey, do you have anything to say? I know I didn't get a chance to really introduce you earlier.
Oh, I really loved the program. It was incredibly edifying and educational. It was really resonated with me. I want to say I care for our building, so I work on it. And I found a couple of little clues and mysteries that are fun. Whenever the gates are open over there, that means I'm working. I choose unusual times, and I'm always happy to not work and do a tour through the building with one person or 8. It doesn't matter. I really love to see visitors come into our space. But there are a couple of things. I redid the foundation on the building and found that only one wall, the east wall, was very unusual and different from all the other walls. I think that is an original foundation wall from 1694. There are some histories that say the building was demolished in 1716, but I don't think, I think it was dismantled, the original little house, because there is a ceiling beam in our worship hall, which is supposed to be original, which is an upside down roof beam. So I think that the original building was dismantled in built in 1694, as we heard, but then taken apart in 1716 and all reconfigured. And I'm certain all those oak beams were reused because materials were scarce. And then the last little mystery is we've heard that underneath the building, and there are two little doors on the east foundation wall, there is an unusual foundation underneath our building that doesn't seem to be connected to our building. And there's long been talk about a farmhouse that pre-existed the Flushing meeting that Bowne gave and Rodman bought. There was a pre-existing farmhouse from the 1500s. And so I'm quite keen for a little, you know, architectural investigation to get underneath and take a look at what I think those foundation walls might be. And I'm sort of hoping they're from the original 1500s farmhouse that predated us.
Okay. We had another question earlier. Has the Mormon Church been completed? I'm not sure if
Not too sure.
anyone here. We can double check on Google Maps and find out. I don't see anything super specific. Let's see. It looks like it has. We also had a question. What was the first name of Franklin buried at the meeting house? And do you know any more about them?
I just saw that question, Jaren, and I think it was Matthew Franklin and William Burling, and I do not know more about them.
Okay. So I actually had a question for Ravi.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure, but isn't there a significance to how one moves through a Hindu temple?
Would you come again?
Isn't there a significance to how one moves through a Hindu temple, navigates the space?
Yes, yes.
Can you describe it?
Okay. See, as I told you, the Hindu faith believes in all souls. Okay, whether they are human beings or animals or anything, any beings. Okay, so there is writings about each and every creatures created by God. So there is an attachment with each creature, with each God. Even though the actual, as per Hindu faith, there is only one God, which is called as Brahman, who does not have any form or shape. We cannot draw it as a picture saying that this is how the God look like. But to have an experience or to connect mentally with the Supreme Being, there are different forms of God were brought in by different sages. So each form is also have some kind of attachment with a particular creature, which may be a human or animal or plant or trees or birds or anything. So that is why each one, in fact, Ganesha, if you see the main shrine, the god is with the elephant head with a human body. So you will also find a small mouse in front of the Ganesh or the main shrine, which represents our mind. Our mind is a wavering mind. So if you see the activity of the mouse, it's wavering always. So everything has got a philosophical meaning to it. Okay. I hope I clarified.
Thank you.
All right. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up?
Any questions?
Oh. Jessica asks if Hindus circumnavigate clockwise or circumambulate, sorry.
Yeah, it is always clockwise.
Always clockwise. Okay.
Yes.
We just want to mention that comment before someone, Allison Clark, mentions it's a very interesting tour, and as a religious studies major and had never heard of Flushing, and this really opened up
Yes.
her mind to the area. So that's very good. I'm glad that this tour is fulfilling that.
All right.
Darren, can I just wrap up with one last thing?
Yes, please.
I just want to thank everybody for participating in today's tour. We're going to be doing additional tours because there is so much information and so much ground to cover, especially in Flushing. I mean, it's literally endless. And we want to bring you more and more quality tours and programming. These are wonderful things that we're doing at Queens Historical Society. In these times, we ask you to please, if you can, to donate to our society. You can visit queenshistorical.org and donate. We are located right off of the Parsons Boulevard and 37th Avenue in the Kingsland Homestead, opposite the Bowne House. Hopefully, one wonderful day we will be open for people to come in and visit us in person, as we love to see and meet everybody from the community. I want to also thank Branka, our executive director. She's here with us. She's waving. Hello. And Jaron, thank you again for all that you do for us and helping out with everything. And, these technical things, they can get a little bit complicated, but we did very, very well. And we're going to hopefully, because there's other places of worship that we should also visit as well, but we could do that in another tour. And I want to thank our guests for being so informative and gracious as to be here and educate us about the sacred sites of Flushing.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Namaste.
Be safe, everybody.
Thank you.